Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into the life of a scientific icon today, Marie Curie. But we're going beyond the typical saint of science
Oh,
image.
definitely. You'll be surprised by some of the things we found.
For this deep dive, we're using excerpts from Adela Munoz Paez's biography of Marie Curie, which is packed with details you don't usually hear about.
Munoz Páez really paints this vivid picture of her. She wasn't just this brilliant mind, but also like a real person navigating a world that wasn't always, well, welcoming to women, especially in
Right.
science.
Yeah, imagine being born in 1867 as Maria Sklodowska in Poland, where women basically couldn't really pursue higher education.
Right. But she was so passionate about learning.
Her dad was a teacher, so she kind of soaked up all this knowledge from him.
But she knew that to, really study science, she'd have to, leave Poland.
So at 24, off she goes to Paris,
The City of Lights.
enrolls at the Sorbonne.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, not only a new country, but one of the few women at this prestigious university.
And get this. When she graduates, she's one of only 2 women who earned a degree that year.
Talk about standing out.
Total rock star. Shows her incredible talent, and dedication.
And this is where our story gets, even more interesting. In
Uh-huh.
this world of, intense scientific study, she meets Pierre Curie.
Already a respected scientist.
And it wasn't just, a love story.
No, not at
It
all.
was a real partnership, both brilliant minds.
Drawn together by their shared passion for science.
They even had a bicycle honeymoon.
So cute.
Okay, so now let's jump back to the science.
All right.
It's the late 1890s, and things are, buzzing in the scientific world.
Everyone's talking about these new discoveries.
Exactly. Roentgen had just found X-rays.
Yeah, then you have Becquerel puzzling over these mysterious uranium rays.
And this is where Marie Curie steps in. She decides to make these rays the focus of her doctoral thesis.
Bold move.
And of course, she didn't do anything halfway. Pierre ends up joining her, and they set up shop, wait for it, in a leaky old shed.
Talk about dedication.
It was their makeshift lab, and they were processing, tons of pitchblende.
Pitchblende.
It's this uranium-rich ore.
Oh, right.
And their meticulous work starts to pay off. They noticed that some pitchblende samples were way more radioactive than just pure uranium.
Interesting.
So they think, well, hold on, there's got to be something else in there.
Something even more radioactive than uranium.
Bingo. They realize there must be these undiscovered elements lurking in the pitchblende.
Wow. So they're using radioactivity itself to discover new elements.
Exactly. Totally revolutionary for the time. And not easy at all.
I bet.
Isolating these new elements was, incredibly difficult.
I can imagine.
And in 1898, they announced the discovery of not one, but 2 new elements, polonium and radium.
2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Polonium, named after Marie's homeland, and radium, which, let's face it, would change the world forever.
Truly groundbreaking.
But here's where it gets, a little tricky. While they focused on radium, it was actually Marie's work on polonium that sparked some controversy later.
Really.
Yeah, other scientists challenged her findings.
So even with these major discoveries, there was, competition and doubt.
Oh, yeah. But despite it all, the world starts to take notice. And in 1903, they win the Nobel Prize in Physics, shared with Becquerel, of course.
Wow.
But get this, you won't believe this. Marie was initially left out of the nomination.
What? Seriously?
Only because Pierre insisted they finally recognize her contribution.
That's just, I can't
It
even.
really shows the sexism she faced even at the highest level.
Unbelievable.
But tragically, their joy was short-lived. A few years later, Pierre dies in this horrific accident,
Oh, that's awful.
leaving Marie to raise their 2 daughters and carry on their work alone.
Heartbreaking.
It was devastating, but Marie, she was incredibly resilient. She took over Pierre's professorship at the Sorbonne.
The first woman to hold that position.
Exactly. And she continued their research, determined to, figure out all the secrets of radioactivity.
Wow.
But while Marie was focused on these new elements, the understanding of radioactivity itself was changing rapidly.
Right. Things are moving so fast in science.
And a key figure in all this was, Ernest Rutherford,
Oh, Rutherford from New Zealand, right.
the one and only. He was initially a bit of a, rival to the Curies.
Really?
Yeah, but his work would end up changing how we see the atom.
I mean, he was a brilliant physicist, and he attracted so many talented people to his lab.
It was like a hotbed for, groundbreaking research.
11 of his students ended up winning Nobel Prizes.
That's amazing. And it was there with Frederick Soddy that he started to, crack the code of radioactive decay.
So what were some of his, big breakthroughs?
Well, first he identified those three types of radiation, alpha, beta, and gamma.
Right, we learned about those in school.
And he realized that radioactive elements were actually changing into other elements.
Transforming.
Yeah, through this process called transmutation.
Like alchemy, but with science.
Pretty much. Atoms weren't these, fixed things anymore.
They could actually change.
It blew everyone's mind. They saw, for example, thorium decaying into radium and then eventually lead, all while emitting those different radiations.
So complex. How do they even figure all that out?
Rutherford and his team made some remarkable discoveries. One big one was the concept of these radioactive decay chains.
Okay, like family trees for elements.
Exactly, showing how they were all related as they transformed. And then there's the idea of half-life.
All right.
Each element has its own half-life, the time it takes for, half of it to decay into something else.
Makes sense.
But interestingly, Pierre Curie wasn't on board with all this, decay and transmutation stuff at first.
He had his own theories, right?
Yeah, brilliant ones. He thought the energy in radioactive elements came from, an outside source.
Fascinating. So two giants of science, both pioneers, but with different ideas.
What a time to be in science. So many discoveries happening.
And debates, too.
Oh, for sure. All of this was happening while scientists were also figuring out what an atom even was. Really?
We take it for granted now, but back then.
Totally. Remember that plum pudding model?
Oh, we have the electrons like raisins.
So far from what we know now. And it was Rutherford's work, that famous gold foil experiment that smashed that old model.
The one where they shot alpha particles at gold and some bounce back.
Yep. Totally unexpected. And that's how he came up with his nuclear model of the atom, with the tiny, dense nucleus and electrons orbiting around it.
A revolution in our understanding.
While the Curies were busy with those new elements, Rutherford was totally changing what we knew about the atom itself.
Incredible. And then there was Henry Moseley, working in Rutherford's lab, too. He made this breakthrough with X-ray spectra.
He figured out that it was the atomic number, not just the weight, that really defined an element.
So not just how heavy it is, but how many protons are in the nucleus.
Exactly. The pace of discovery was just insane.
So much happening so fast.
And remember, all this while Marie is dealing with the loss of Pierre.
It's hard to imagine.
But she keeps going with her research, becomes the first female professor at the Sorbonne.
A true inspiration.
But, as all this amazing science was happening, were they starting to realize how dangerous radioactivity could be?
Yeah, the awareness was definitely growing. Pierre Curie himself had done experiments showing radium's harmful effects on animals.
Right. And both he and Marie were having health problems.
It's sad that what they discovered was also, slowly poisoning them.
It shows that even brilliant minds can be, a bit blind to the risks, especially when you're caught up in the excitement of discovery.
Totally.
And back then they used radium in everything, toothpaste, cosmetics, you name it.
Yikes. They had no idea.
So we have the Curies isolating radium, Rutherford changing how we see the atom, and this growing but still limited understanding of the dangers of radioactivity.
It was a crazy time. What happens next for Marie Curie? Well, things took a pretty dramatic turn in 1914, not just for Marie Curie, but for, the whole world.
World War I. Yeah.
Exactly. Everything changed. And Marie, being, so practical and focused, she knew she had to do something.
She couldn't just, sit on the sidelines.
No way.
Yeah.
She saw how her knowledge of radioactivity could actually be useful, even life-saving, on the battlefields.
It's amazing how she shifted gears like that.
It really is. She basically put her research on hold to, help with the war effort. She became a huge advocate for using X-rays in battlefield hospitals.
Yeah, imagine trying to locate bullets and shrapnel without X-rays.
It was revolutionary. And
Yeah.
she didn't just talk about it. She actually drove these mobile X-ray units, right to the front lines.
The Petites Curies.
Yes.
Yeah.
A cute name.
I love it. And they ended up saving so many lives, doctors could actually see what they were dealing with.
It's such a powerful example of how Marie Curie's scientific knowledge had this, direct impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. She was a true humanitarian. And her daughter, Irene, even helped her with this work.
Irene was just a teenager then.
I know. It must have had a huge influence on her, considering she became a famous scientist herself later on.
Like mother, like daughter.
Yeah.
But after the war, as Marie Curie went back to her research, her health started to, decline.
Years of working with radiation was catching up with her.
It's such a tragic irony, isn't it?
Uh,
The very element she helped discover was slowly poisoning her.
it really makes you think.
But even with her health problems, she was still a driving force in science. In 1914, the Radium Institute in Paris was finally completed.
From a leaky shed to leading this prestigious institute, that's quite a journey.
It's amazing. And her impact went way beyond just that. She really pushed for international standards for radium, for measuring it and handling it safely.
That makes sense. She understood the dangers firsthand.
She saw that the lack of standards was a problem. Different labs were using different units, so it was hard to compare results or even ensure safety.
Right, it was kind of chaotic.
Exactly. So she led this effort to establish an international radium standard, which was a big deal for research and, for using radium responsibly.
It's a lesson that's still relevant today, right? Like with all these new technologies emerging.
Oh, absolutely. Thinking about the ethical side of things, the potential risks, it's crucial.
So Marie Curie wasn't just focused on the discoveries, she was also thinking about how to use them safely and ethically.
Exactly. And she was also a big believer in collaboration. She saw science as this, global endeavor, something that went beyond borders.
Right, it wasn't about competition all the time.
Not at all. And that's why her trip to the United States in 1921 was so significant.
Yeah, she was like a rock star over there.
I mean, she was already world famous for her work, and people were just fascinated by her. The U.S. was becoming this scientific powerhouse, too, so it was a good match.
And they really supported her research.
Oh, yeah. They even gave her a gram of radium as a gift.
Wait, a whole gram?
Yep. President Harding presented it to her himself. It was a big deal. And it helped her a lot with her research.
Wow, that's an amazing gift. But sadly, even with all the success and support, her health continued to,
Deteriorate, yeah.
Yeah.
The long-term effects of all that radiation exposure were really taking their toll. She had anemia, cataracts. It was a tough time.
It's heartbreaking to think the element she discovered ultimately contributed to her death.
It really is. She died in 1934. But even in her final years, she never lost her passion for science.
She was dedicated until the very end, and her legacy lived on, not just through the Radium Institute, but also through her children.
Yes. Irene and Frederick Joliot-Curie, they continued the work, making their own groundbreaking discoveries in artificial radioactivity.
It's a fitting tribute. This family, all pushing the boundaries of science, and their work with artificial radioactivity, it had this, ripple effect.
Oh, huge. It led to advancements in medicine, energy production.
And unfortunately, the development of nuclear weapons.
It's a complex legacy, incredible scientific triumphs,
Yep.
but also the realization that those triumphs can have, unintended consequences.
It's a lot to think about. So, as we move towards the end of our deep dive into Marie Curie's life, what are some of the big takeaways?
Well, I think it's impossible not to be inspired by her dedication, her pursuit of knowledge. Even in the face of so many obstacles, she was a pioneer in science and for women in science.
Absolutely. And her humanitarian work during World War I, it shows her compassion and her belief in using science to help people.
Totally. But her story also serves as this, cautionary tale. We have to remember the responsibility that comes with scientific discovery.
Like with radium, they were so excited about it, but didn't fully understand the dangers.
Right. That's a lesson we can't forget, especially today with all the new technologies we're developing.
Scientific progress and ethical considerations, they have to go hand in hand. So we were talking about the darker side of those scientific triumphs, right?
Yeah, how those triumphs can have those, those unintended consequences.
Exactly. And it's especially relevant when we consider Marie Curie's legacy, right? Her work was groundbreaking, but it also paved the way for, things like nuclear weapons.
Right. And, it wasn't just Marie's work. Her children, Irene and Frederick, they also played a key role in those developments.
Right. Their work on artificial radioactivity. Can we, dive into that a little more? What exactly is artificial radioactivity?
Sure. So think about it like this. Marie Curie focused on elements that were naturally radioactive, radium, polonium.
Right. They just kind of, they are what they are. They decay naturally.
Exactly. But what Irene and Frederick did was figure out how to make elements that weren't naturally radioactive, become radioactive.
Wait, so they could, induce radioactivity?
Yep. They basically figured out how to force stable atoms to become unstable, to behave like their radioactive counterparts.
So they could take something that wasn't radioactive and make it radioactive. That's pretty incredible.
It was a massive discovery. And it had this huge impact, especially in medicine.
Oh, right. Like with those, what are they called?
Radioisotopes?
Yeah.
They're used in all sorts of things. Medical imaging, diagnosis, treatments. Think BE scans, radiation therapy. It all stems from their work.
Wow. So the Curie family, from a leaky shed to, discovering new elements and then figuring out artificial radioactivity. They really revolutionized how we see the atom.
And the power it holds, right?
Right. And that's where things get, well, a little complicated. It's amazing how their work led to so many advancements, but it also,
Led to the development of nuclear weapons.
yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Marie Curie spent her life trying to unlock the secrets of the atom, and her work led to these incredible things, but also something so destructive.
It's a reminder that scientific progress isn't always straightforward. It's not always, good or bad. It's about how we use that knowledge, the choices we make.
So it's like, with great power comes great responsibility, kind of.
Exactly. Scientists have a responsibility to think about the potential implications of their work.
Mm.
And not just the good stuff, but the bad stuff too.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Marie Curie's life, what are, like, the key things we should remember about her?
Well, her relentless curiosity, right? Her dedication to science, even when things were really tough. She faced so many challenges, but never gave up.
And she wasn't just this scientific mind. She was also a humanitarian. Remember her work during World War I with those mobile X-ray units?
Right? Saving lives on the battlefields. It shows that, science can be a powerful force for good. But we also have to remember the radium situation.
Right, how it was used in all sorts of products without, really understanding how dangerous it was.
It's a reminder that we have to use scientific knowledge responsibly.
That's a good point. And maybe it's also important to remember that scientists are, well, they're people too.
They're not just these, robots in lab coats.
Exactly. They have passions, struggles, and their work is influenced by all of that. Marie Curie's story, it's full of triumphs, but also tragedies.
Right. It wasn't always easy, but she never stopped pushing forward, trying to understand the world around her. And she changed the world in the process.
Absolutely. And that's something to think about, how our pursuit of knowledge, it can lead to amazing things, but it's not always a simple path.
Well said. Marie Curie's story is still relevant today, even though she lived over a century ago. It raises questions about the ethics of science, about the responsibility that comes with discovery, and it challenges us to think about how we want to shape the future with the knowledge we gain.
So we have a lot to learn from her, both from her successes and, from the mistakes that were made along the way. And it's on all of us to keep those lessons in mind as we keep exploring the world and pushing the boundaries of what we know.
It's an ongoing conversation, right?
For sure. And we hope this deep dive into Marie Curie's life has given you some food for thought.
And maybe even inspired you to, learn more about this fascinating world of science and its impact on our lives.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time,